It is great to have all of you joining us once again for the Jesus Culture Podcast. We're talking this week about, which I always feel like our titles are always just thrown together.
We just make them up.
Other podcasts spend a lot of time on their titles, and we just kind of make them up as we go. Halfway through our conversation, I feel like we should have a different title. We already committed to it at the beginning.
It's true. Other podcasts, what they do is it's real intriguing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, like we're talking
mystery.
About, the future and how we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
And we're like, complaining.
Yeah, our thing is we promise low and deliver high. Other people promise high and deliver low, and so I just would rather that. So we are talking about internal motivation versus external motivation.
That's right.
Can't even say it. Internal motivation versus external motivation. How to live an internally motivated life.
There you go. See, that's the good title. We'll use that one.
How to live an internally motivated life. So great to have all of you guys with us wherever you may be, and they're on a beach somewhere,
Denmark,
they're at work somewhere, all over
Sweden,
all over the world. So
China.
great to have you with us. We've been in here talking a little bit. I realized because we all kind of have our pre-show talk or whatever else it is. And Phil, which if you're watching YouTube, you'll see Phil. Phil has these new glasses. Are they new?
Yeah, they're actually not. I just don't wear them very often.
Okay, so Phil has glasses.
He doesn't wear them because there's a reason.
Yeah, Phil has glasses that I am not used to, and they look like Filbert's glasses. So I didn't grow up watching Filbert, but I know Filbert because Becky has a whole message where she does a whole 10-minute stand-up little comedy routine with like the voice impression, everything of Filbert.
Yeah.
It's really brilliant.
That's the thing. That's what happens when you preach. I poured my soul into that message, trying to give biblical truth, and you remember Filbert.
I literally don't know if I can remember the rest of the message. I just remember the really funny part where you just talked about Filbert and you did his little impression and you did his little voice.
Filbert's this nervous turtle on a show from Nickelodeon called Rocko's Modern Life. And when Derek and I first started dating, he said, "You are just like Filbert." And I thought, that's so sweet. You adore me.
Rose-colored glasses.
You adore me. I had never seen Filbert. So he goes, yeah, he's this nervous turtle.
And here's why you didn't have Filbert. Because Derek grew up with money.
Yeah, he grew up
and watched Nickelodeon.
Yeah, he grew up rich.
You grew up without money and watched PBS.
Yep, Mr. Rogers.
That's exactly right. So
Reading
all
Rainbow.
the rich kids that are listening right now know what Filbert is.
Yeah.
So he said, "You remind me of Filbert," and you're thinking like, "Wow, is that a really beautiful turtle?"
Yeah, I thought, it's just probably your favorite character from your favorite childhood show, and he showed me Filbert, and it's this nervous turtle with these big, thick glasses, and he's just like, "Oh, I'm nervous. I'm nauseous. Oh, I don't know about that, Rocco." Everything's like he's really nervous about everything, which is me. I'm worrisome, and things do make me like nauseous. Big changes. So I watched it and I was like, "This is not a compliment."
This is not a compliment.
So
it's accurate, but not a compliment.
When Phil showed up,
Phil FaceTime today. I'm like, "Whoa." It's Filbert. And he didn't really know Filbert either, so we had to send him.
Yep.
And then he said this, he goes, "My feelings are hurt." Which was more Filbert. Which was more Filbert. So do you notice this, Phil? I'm the oldest one out of all three of us easily. Becky is just now laughing at you, thinking of Filbert. If you could be on a swing, can you be on a swing and just say, I'm nauseous?
There's some jokes that like are enough not true that you can say them to people, but when you place, this is where we need bozos and stuff like that.
Totally. You're like, this is a little too close to home, guys. Well, I don't know if you guys have found this, and I'm the oldest one of this whole group by decent age, but
so much older.
But I am like way more sensitive as I get older. And a lot of it, like, I don't like people making fun of me now. I don't know what happened to me.
Which is interesting because you're the ultimate razzer. Like you.
Yeah, but I don't
fun.
it sounds like I make fun of people because I just called Phil Filbert. But I'm not like really digging at people.
No,
I'm not that. I'm not like cutting with my jokes or sarcasm.
It's very friendly and loving.
But I find as I'm getting older and my kids are all doing Snapchatting and they like want to catch you in some like embarrassing thing where you're whatever. I don't even know. Like you're
eating or you're blowing your nose, and they just zoom in.
And they want to zoom in, and then they want to post it, and I don't find it funny. And now my whole family's like, "Stop being so hurt. You're such a baby now. When did you become such a baby as you got older?" I'm like, I I don't know, okay? But I don't want you to post that on Snapchat to your friends or whatever else, Or my kids, now because they're all teenagers and they all like team up on me with their like, and I'm like trying to like, just like laugh along with them. But I'm like, I am hurting right now. Is that
one of the things that I process with Emily? If my wife, for most people, is a very serious, studious, kind of like she's an introvert. She's brilliant. So, most people don't, but actually when she gets comfortable, she gets really funny. She gets really sarcastic. And I remember there were points where she would just like make jokes that hurt my feelings. And I was like, Emily, you can't say that. That hurts my feelings. And then she would mock me more than my feelings.
What are you, such a big baby, Phil? Totally. It's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle. Yeah, I try to not to admit it, but I realized I'm like, wow, what happened to me? Like, I felt like I could take a good one, and it's not anymore. Are there certain things for you, Becky, that you're like, all of a sudden it's like, okay, that's too much?
Oh, absolutely. I don't like to be the butt of jokes. I'm an Enneagram 1, okay? So I'm like, listen.
So perfection. So jokes show that you're not perfect?
Yes, and it's just not right. It's just not right. I deal with enough pain as a youth pastor.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if this happens to you or Becky, because all three of us are preaching pretty consistently. But, for me, like when I'm, all of us, when we're preaching, like I am bringing my heart and my passion and I'm working hard. Like and Banning, you are naturally really funny in a way that I'm not. And so for me, my sermons end up tending to be a little bit more serious. Right. And I wish, but then my staff comes to me sometimes and they like have this whole list of running jokes of things that I say, or I repeat myself, or words that I use. And then sometimes they'll they'll say these things, like these little idioms that I think, and like, I'm like, my feelings are so hurt. I'm like, I cried in that sermon and all you took away from it was the word I accidentally made up.
Oh, that's funny. Yes. It's kind of,
They posted a photo of you on the square the other day of you like really looking serious and somber and almost like crying, and that was the photo they used to talk about his church or whatever. I'm like,
it's not right.
This is Phil 101. I've tried to mentor Phil. This is the honest truth, and he's actually kind of rejected my help. Because he'll tell stories, and I don't know if we've told him on the podcast or not, the funniest like childhood stories, the funniest Pentecostal Idaho stories, like the funniest stories. I'm like, Phil, if I had those stories, I would use them every single week.
Who doesn't love a good Pentecostal Idaho story?
I would just figure out somehow how to put in a story where I got arrested for stealing a CD from a store and then got banned from that store or whatever else. I'm like, I would just figure out how to put that into a sermon because that's one of the funniest stories I've ever heard. And yet somehow he still wants to,
because he's nauseous.
He's nauseous.
He's concerned.
He's Filbert.
It's one of the funny things too is, Becky, I don't know if you noticed this. I as a youth pastor, I feel like you have like a different wheelhouse of stories. Like there's just stories you use when you're trying to connect with teenagers. And I found there were some stories that were actually like they were too much, and then people didn't listen to anything else I said. Like I would literally give my everything to a sermon, and then at the end they would just come up and go, "That poop story was so funny." I'm like, "That's what you took away? You poop story?"
This is it. This is Filbert with me. They're like, "Do the turtle again." I'm like, "No, read your Bible." They're like, "Do the turtle."
Well, I've told you guys this before, but I still have I was in youth ministry for 12 years, 10 as a head youth pastor, so I was preaching all those years. And I would run into people I didn't know, but they had attended youth group, they'd been a part of youth group, and they would immediately just reference a story that I told, and it was about poop. Have I told you the Phantom Pooper story, Phil?
It's a good story.
Yeah, so this is like, everybody's going to know the Phantom Pooper, which we won't have to tell right now, but like it's a whole story that I tell and about me over at somebody's house, and it involves, going to the bathroom, and it's a whole thing.
We can do an extended cut where the Phantom Pooper will be at the end of the video.
Well, listen, so I'm literally at a restaurant years later. I'm not youth pastor anymore.
Oh, gosh.
And somebody's like serving us, and they look at us and they go, Phantom Pooper.
Oh my gosh.
Like that's what they told me. And I'm like, that's all you remember, isn't it? That is legitimately, I unpacked the word for generation for 10 years.
Yeah.
And what you remember is that story.
That's right.
Yeah. That's how it works. Well, before we get into our topic about how to live an internally motivated life.
I like that title. I think you should write a book on that.
Boom. I think I did write a book on this, but that's a different ballgame. Becky, you are coming up to almost full term?
7 months pregnant.
Could you have the baby right now? Is it when's that point?
No, four more weeks, and then
4 more weeks. And are you finding yourself? You just finished?
I'm done.
Finito with this.
I'm done.
And what do you miss most about not being pregnant?
Just the happiness of life.
Filbert, you really are. Derek was right on with this.
I miss everything about not being pregnant. Being able to sleep on like in any position that I want. And also how long I feel like a whale or like the Titanic in bed when I'm trying to turn. It's like a process. Like, okay, I'm going to flip to the other side.
Yeah.
Okay, we can do this.
Yeah,
and then
on.
I just like start the slow turn.
Yeah.
So I'm just excited for movement, just being agile again.
Yeah.
And then we talked about coffee. I guess I do drink more coffee when I'm not pregnant. So I miss that second cup of coffee, like that 2 p.m. cup.
Yeah, you can only have one. Do you drink decaf?
No, I don't. Decaf is pointless. Why do people drink decaf? If you drink decaf, you're dumb. Because you drink coffee for caffeine. Nobody likes the taste of coffee that much. I'm going to make a lot of people mad. I'm having a Toby Mac Jars of Clay moment.
Yeah. Do you drink decaf just because you like the taste?
Yeah, at night I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Phil?
I love the taste of coffee with like certain desserts, but you know, I'm old now, so I can't have caffeine whenever.
I was going to say that it's a sign when you're drinking decaf at night for the taste.
That's amazing.
But there are some
middle-aged
desserts that are just like perfect with coffee. So if you're going to have them at night, you got to have decaf.
I actually had this conversation with a friend where for milk, there are certain things that when you eat them, like milk is just so satisfying. And so it'll be a graham cracker or something. And when I was actually drinking milk, but I would eat that graham cracker just so I could have the milk satisfaction after that graham cracker.
So that's Phil and his desserts with coffee.
That's Phil and his
That
desserts
is a
coffee.
sign of like you're hanging out at the diner with the senior citizens. You're having
totally.
your decaf coffee and a
Totally.
piece of pie.
Piece of pie,
My
totally.
grandma does that, Phil.
Yes, Phil. Phil, I'm sorry that you just shared your heart that your wife makes fun of you and it hurts your feelings, and now Becky is just piling this on. Can we apologize on the podcast?
Called internal motivation and why we don't like Phil. So we can,
Yes, totally. It's a little of both. That's what you get at this podcast, spiritual development and sarcasm.
That's right.
How to live an internal motivated life. This is actually a big one. I think that in our society especially, we don't even realize it, but most of us are externally motivated.
Yep.
And I think sometimes, we talk a lot about this, that there's kind of kingdom living, and then there's just cultural living, just the culture of our day. And so many people don't realize that much of our life is just kind of caught up in the current of culture, just what it is. And the world is set up to externally motivate you.
Yeah.
Like the world is somehow set up, they're externally motivating you by telling you you're not good enough, by putting a speed limit sign up, by putting a grade attached to this and all this type of stuff. And so we're just constantly externally motivated. And yet the kingdom, the kingdom is it's a different motivation that we're to live from. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we understand that, because I think if we're really going to truly fully live life to the fullest, or, the Bible talks a lot about the fullness of God and all that stuff. I think that we have to make that transition from living externally driven to living internally driven.
This is actually something I had never encountered until getting in this environment and getting Jesus culture environment and kind of the culture that we were developing here. I was young, thankfully, so it's really molded me. But can you talk about what that is? I feel like people could even be listening thinking, what's wrong with what is being externally motivated and what's wrong with that? Because my whole life, I'm like, I live externally motivated. People, it's kind of how we raise our kids too.
Yeah.
We don't raise our kids really. You have to take a different course of parenting to go, I'm going to try to raise kids who are internally motivated.
Yeah.
Punishment and all that stuff that we do.
The illustration that I used in my book, 3 Mile Walk, available where books are sold. The illustration that we used, even in just a picture, is, up until the turn of the century, the world was really transportation for the most part. Obviously, there's steam engine and different things, but transportation was really horses. And they would have these horse-drawn carriages in cities, and that was the majority of what was happening. And so if you can just picture like a horse-drawn carriage, and all of a sudden they shifted, and there's an internal combustion engine that comes out, and that's that picture a little bit, where it's these horses that are kind of pulling a carriage along, compared to an internal engine that's driving that car forward. And really all the differences with that. And I think we don't realize it, but the circumstances of life are pulling us along. Pain is pulling us along. Deadlines are pulling us along. Speed limits are pulling us along. All this stuff's pulling us along, and we don't even realize that we're not actually living internally motivated life. That if you remove the external pressure, if you remove the external circumstances, do you still continue to move forward, or do you stop? And it's been a real passion of ours for a long time, just to figure out how do we get believers to actually begin to live. And this is, in our world, not everybody listening to pastor, but pastors will understand this. A lot of the church is set up to be externally motivated. Like, we're trying to figure out how to externally motivate people, maybe through fear, maybe through guilt, maybe through shame, maybe through
our systems and structures. We'll put you in a small group. We'll remind you about the small group. We're gonna make sure that someone follows up with you to get in community. We're gonna really put a lot of external pressure on you to get connected, to get involved, to mature.
And I think the reality is, one of the main signs of maturity is I'm now an internally motivated believer. It's a little bit like my son. My son, when he's younger, we have to externally motivate him to brush his teeth, to change his clothes, to take a shower, to eat something decent. If we didn't externally motivate him, he'd never brush his teeth, he'd never change his clothes, he'd never take a shower, and he would live on a steady diet of cup of noodles, Sour Patch Kids, and Cheez-Its. Like, this is what he would eat. But as he grows and matures, the goal is that he's now being internally motivated to eat healthy, to brush his teeth, to take care of himself, that it's an internal motivation that's moving him, not external people or situations. And I think sometimes when we look around, we realize, man, we're either not moving forward or not moving forward in a healthy way, because it's just so externally driven.
I think we talked about this a lot when we were doing podcasts at the very beginning, March 2020 of shutdown. We all kind of realized how much of our life, even in being internally motivated, mature leaders who believe in this, realizing it's easy to slip into that, relying on other things to get you going, right? Why do I get up in the morning and make my bed and, get dressed, or, how our spiritual disciplines, I think Phil and I were talking about that, realizing, man, we've set up so much of our spiritual life around external motivation. And all of a sudden, shutdown and no church and all that took that away. And we're left with, am I actually internally motivated to pursue depth with Jesus and maturing in God?
And connection and community.
My relationships. It's amazing.
I think what people don't realize is the problem with external motivation is that it actually isn't enough. Like, it may be working in the moment, but it's going to fail you eventually. And here's the problem. It deceives you. So when it does fail you, you will think someone else is the problem. And I mean, this is what has happened to so many people, is they don't realize that they are motivated by the wrong things. And ultimately, when it doesn't work out and that motivation dies up, they go, well, this happened in my life because of this person, this situation, that church, this thing, rather than going, hey, actually, you have everything you need to live a godly life in Jesus through the spirit of adoption that's been placed in you. You've just never let that spirit of adoption mature into everything that it's supposed to be.
Right. It's the perfect setup for victim mode. I mean, that's where it's birthed right there, is everything has happened to me or didn't happen for me, and now here I am. And it's really sad.
And even in the Christian life, like we get this, and all three of us honor this, like the role of the church is to come alongside, to help, to give. It's not that there isn't a call on pastors and churches and leaders and to come alongside and go, hey, I'm going to give you things that help in this process. But ultimately, if you are not the one driving this process in your life, transformation, internal motivation to really become like Jesus, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of the things, some people are like, what does it look like? One of the main areas, and a lot of people have heard this shared this way, but you're either driven by pain or you're driven by vision. And pain is that external motivator. So, so we're driven by a lot of different stuff. We're driven by pain, external motivator. We're driven by shame. We're driven by a boss that's angry with us. We're driven by wanting to fit in, whatever else it is. But if you're driven by pain, that happens when you hear these stories all the time. A guy's super unhealthy, has a heart attack, and then all of a sudden decides to change his eating habits, to change his nutrition, to change his fitness, to change all that type of stuff because he had this pain moment that's now motivating him. So you can be motivated by pain, or you can be motivated by vision, by external circumstances or by internal vision. Same thing with marriages, that the husband or wife doesn't want to change. It's unhealthy. They don't want to change until finally the spouse says, I'm divorcing you, I'm leaving. Well, all of a sudden now I've got this motivation where I didn't have that motivation before to change for a vision for health, but now all of a sudden because you're leaving, I'm going to change. And I think for me, we just have to go, no, I want to be an internally motivated individual. I don't need somebody else. And I would even say this. I think that what Phil's saying is right, that I think when you're immature, some external motivation isn't bad.
Right,
But the goal is to become mature, where you don't need external motivation to pray, to show up to serve, to have a vision to be healthy, to grow in your marriage, to get free, to whatever else you go down.
Right.
That it's not external people, situations, circumstances, pain that's motivating me now. It's actually just the Spirit of God living inside of me, and I'm living from an inside out place, not from an outside in. And I do think what you're saying, Phil, is there, like, external motivation can move you forward, but not all forward movement is equal.
Right.
Not all forward movement is healthy. And in the short term, you may not fully know. What would be an example of that? Maybe you go to a church that you just feel, everybody else is reading the Bible, and you feel like you're going to be left out if you don't read the Bible, and you feel guilty if you don't read the Bible, so you read the Bible. There's some forward movement, but that thing has a shelf life on it, and eventually that won't continue.
Yeah.
Because being obligated from duty is not an internal reality.
Yeah.
I think
It's not sustainable.
Of external motivation that is the most helpful is just actually putting examples to things people don't feel confident in doing. Like I know some people who they know they should pray, but they don't feel confident praying. But as there's been some structures that we've put into place to help teach people how to pray, then they get it. And then the internal motivation is really there. And I think that is the right role of external motivation, or the right role of structure, whatever that may be, is actually just where people feel unequipped, right? And that Ephesians 4, that's what the Bible says the church is there for, to equip, right? So where people feel unequipped, those kind of structures and external motivations become really helpful. But you, as a follower of Jesus, have to then learn how to take that external motivation and translate it into internal, or it'll be meaningless in the end.
Yeah.
It's kind of what, I'm thinking employees. There's that's the difference between employees and leaders. The boss, an employee, when I was working at Starbucks, I was externally motivated to mop the floor because that was what was on the chart. That's what was on my list of duties. But, a manager comes in and there's just different level of ownership. You talk about it with kids too, right?
Yeah.
When you have your own kids, I'm internally motivated to take care of this kid, to shape the behavior. When I'm a babysitter, I'm just doing what's on the list, what you tell me to do. And that's that.
Yeah. And what Becky's talking about is that a parent and a babysitter can look similar at times. Because they both might be putting the kid to bed, giving the kid a bath, getting dinner for the kid, reading books with the kid, playing a game with the kid. They can look similar in what they're doing, but their motivations are different, because that babysitter doesn't do that without a paycheck and a list.
Exactly.
A parent does it, even though a parent doesn't get a paycheck for having kids, and there's no list, because they're internally motivated, because love is an internal motivation concept. And this babysitter does that because they're getting paid.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the shift, is we really want to see people shift from being a babysitter to a parent. And much of this is really just around personal responsibility. In all honesty, if you're an internally motivated person, what it says is, I have taken responsibility for my life.
Yeah.
An external driven person is saying that other people or things are responsible for my life. An internally driven person is saying, I am responsible for my life. And when you have a sense of personal responsibility, you live different.
Absolutely.
You just live differently. I don't need people to tell me what to do when I take responsibility for my life.
Absolutely.
And it's something you said is, I think, the key, which is love, right? Love is actually the power of true internal motivation. And this is why even, the book of Romans talks about how you've not been given a spirit of fear to fall back into slavery. I actually think this is connected to these issues. Fear is an external motivator. It's something you do to please it, but you haven't been given a spirit of fear. You've been given a spirit of adoption. Yeah. It's a way of talking about this love. Like I actually would say to anyone who's struggling with like a real sense of internal motivation in their life with God, I would call you to come back to first love, because where there is first love, you cannot help yourself, right? Think about it. We all know this. When we fell in love with our spouses, that place of love, like you did not have to convince me to pursue Emily, to love Emily, to serve Emily, to want to be around Emily, because I was motivated by love. And that's something that we miss when we actually have first love in its right place with Jesus. That internal motivation is going to come fully alive.
Well, way to summarize the entire podcast in a passionate discourse, Phil.
There you go. Way to go, Phil.
Thank you.
Well, let me add this, because I think you missed this part, Phil, that I think obedience is birthed in love as well.
Yeah.
And so that thing of so much of being an internally motivated person is really just connected to being obedient. Mm-hmm. I want to be obedient to what God's called me to do. I want to be obedient to the person He's called me to become. But that obedience is still coming from a place of, I do that because I love Him and because I'm loved by Him. Therefore, I want to be obedient. And you can see those people that are in love with Jesus, and their drive to be obedient to Him above all else is really where that kind of internal motivation kicks in.
And we talked about this before we started, that has to be, that can't be dependent on, obedience can't be dependent on when people are watching. I'm doing well when people are watching, when the spotlight's on me, when I'm rewarded for it.
Which again, it's an external concept.
Exactly.
It's when there's external situations happening around me, I do good.
And it's such a shift. It's actually a hard shift. I feel for people who are stuck in that cycle, because I think, like you said, society is set up to externally motivate us. And I think when you are raised in a generation or family lines, like I love my family, but man, it was just victim mode. It was just like this. We've just been dealt a bad hand, okay? And women have struggled in our family, and that is just what it is. And it's, so, and to make that shift of taking personal responsibility, it was really difficult for me. But man, once I did it, talk about the fullness of God.
Yeah.
My life changed radically.
Yeah.
I mean, radically. And there is it's
a powerful feeling.
Absolutely. You can have a relationship with Jesus, and you can be living in, not like you're not living in right standing with God if you're externally motivated, but there is another level. And it really became apparent to me, like, oh, this is the fullness of God. This is what you're talking about. This is the full freedom when I'm living out of obedience, motivated by love and taking responsibility. Oh, things just flourish. It's hard to describe.
I think the gospel, being the gospel of power, is obviously connected to, supernatural signs and wonders, all that stuff. But I think that God's heart for us is empowerment, that we would walk in power, that we would be powerful. And there's something about when I live internally motivated, a sense of powerfulness in my life, where when I live externally motivated and as a victim, it's just powerless. Oh. It's like, why is it? I'm powerless. I mean, this life just happens to me, and things just happen to me, and I got to get up and show up to work every day, and it's that type of thing. And you really are missing out on the fullness of what God has for you if you're living powerless all the time in victim mode rather than powerful, in charge of your life, motivated internally, not going from one pain point to the next, one pressure point to the next pressure point, one this or one that.
Yeah.
It is a different way to live.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things you had said, Banning, that I think is such a key for people is to realize that love, as it matures, looks like obedience. And it is often because we aren't willing to mature that we're actually not willing to let our lives go the places that it's meant to. That's right. When Jesus, right, he's talking to his disciples, John 15, he's like, hey, if you love me, you're going to obey me. And it's not actually a statement of like God being weird. It's actually an understanding of when you let love mature, it's not, it doesn't stay in these places where it has to be conditional or has to happen this way or has to come around you. It really becomes this point of faithfulness. That faithfulness is what love looks like when it matures. It's what it looks like in marriage. It's what it looks like in relationship. And it's certainly what it looks like with Jesus.
And that's available to people. Like, I think that's something I'd want to say, you look at people like that, like, well, I just don't have that motivation, or I'm not wired that way. It's not a personality type. It's not a type A. It's not a, get her done personality type. Like, love is universal and obedience to Jesus. And so whatever way you're wired, that is what is available to you. That level of personal responsibility, internal motivation, duty, obligation, moving into passion and desire and relationship is available to all believers. And yeah,
I agree. And I think that it's funny, the more mature I get and the more that my life is based out of my love for God, the more I find that my life really does boil down to obedience. At the end of the day, it doesn't boil down to dreams and passions in my heart or vision, or it just boils down to flat out obedience. It's interesting. And people ask, well, why are you doing? People ask me this. I was on a call recently, and we had, which is 10 years ago now that we did Chicago. Man, it's just so bizarre to think that. But when we were in Chicago, and it's the biggest step we'd ever taken, and I'm 35, and it was this whole thing, and people said, man, you've really stepped out and taken some faith steps in your life. What was that? And it's funny because I'm like, it didn't feel like faith. It just felt like obedience. It felt like if I didn't do it, I'd be in disobedience. So even some of the things that look like faith, they're just obedience. Even some of the things that are internally, the internal drive inside of me is just to be obedient. Yeah. And so much of, the more that I fall in love with Jesus, the more I just want to be obedient. And I think that internal motivation is connected to love. And you're exactly right. There are things you'll do, like the way that we would do that is like sometimes in order to pray, you need the pastor to come up with some type of snazzy saying for it, and some this, and some like calling the whole church and doing this whole prayer thing to get to motivate you to pray. But if you have kids, and I'm not sure there's anything that we probably feel more responsible for than our children, personally responsible for. You don't need anybody to motivate you and fire you up to pray for your kids. Like you are on your face before God praying for your kids because you have a deep sense of personal responsibility for them because of love. Yeah. And so I think the more that we have that, the more then that personal responsibility comes, the more it just looks like obedience. We should name this thing obedience, because so much of this thing is just obedience.
Here's in the podcast where we realize what we should have titled it.
It's just flat out, are you obeying God? That is an internally motivated life, looks like a life of love that then is manifested and revealed through obedience. You could tell Philbert wants to say something.
Oh man, no, it's what actually, what people don't realize is what makes you a safe person too. Like it's when you have come to the point that I am going to operate out of this place and I'm going to choose a way of obedience. It's where integrity comes from. It's where safety comes from. It's where honor comes from. It makes what you a healthy person to be around. Like everything that people actually ache for is so connected to this, and they don't even realize how important it is and how much it'll change their life. And even on a really practical note, and I'm sure Banning, you and Becky, both of you would fully agree with this. Like, I don't want to work with people who aren't internally motivated. It is Like there's just
exhausting.
something about what makes you trustworthy is that you're going to go after what God has called you to go after. And I'm not going to have to constantly push you and go, hey. There's just, we need internally motivated believers.
Yeah, if you want promotion in your life, if you're wondering like, well, why are things feeling stuck? Or, I deserve to be here or there, have breakthrough in this area. I would first and foremost look at how motivated are you and where are you taking personal responsibility?
It's way easier to rein somebody in than try to figure out how to fire somebody up.
Oh, absolutely.
It's way easier to direct an internally motivated person than try to figure out how to light a fire underneath somebody that's not. I'll say in my own life, this is a long time ago now, but when I was interning, I'm 19 years old, interning, feel a deep, deep call of God on my life. Mm-hmm. Getting paid $15 a week, which we didn't get paid, it was just gas money. I got $15 a week for gas money. So it was just a volunteer year. But, I felt a deep call in my life. And so when everybody else went home, I was staying behind and making phone calls and folding flyers. We did the tri-fold flyers back then. Folding flyers and making phone calls and showing up earlier and doing all that type of stuff. Not because I had to, because I just felt a real call in my life.
Yeah.
And you're right. You want to make advancements in life. Figure out where you're externally motivated, and figure out where you're in, and how to get to an internally motivated spot.
And look at that with your marriage. We talked about obedience. Like, you can't say you're living in full obedience and then just have areas where you're like, because God's calling us to all areas of our life, to mature and grow in all of them, in your finance management, in your marriage, in your relationships, in every area. So, it's not a pick and choose. Well, or, my spouse is in the driver's seat of the marriage, so I just kind of take a step back. Like, that is not how we're to live. And shouldn't that set us apart as Christians? Shouldn't the world be looking at a breed of people that, wow, look, there's just something different about them. When the world needs to be externally motivated, as believers, we aren't.
Yeah.
I think even in our futures, we've got to realize how much this actually affects the rest of the direction of our lives. Like, one of the things that the Bible teaches us is that those who are faithful with little get invited to steward more. Part of what we don't understand about our relationship with God is how much it depends on trust, and that God is inviting us into a relationship. I even think about my own life. And when Emily and I were first married and we were going to college in Southern California, and I was 21 and she was 21, and we went to this church, and it met in a school, and it wasn't a huge church. We really enjoyed the church, really loved the pastor, and it was set up and tear down every Sunday. And I hated it. I hated set up and tear down with every part of my being. And it wasn't a huge church, so there wasn't very many of us who were willing to do it. And I grumbled. I didn't love it all the time. In fact, there's times like I was like, this is not fun. But the idea of not doing it, the idea of knowing there was a deep place of need in my church and not doing it was something that was not even an option for me. Yeah. And I didn't have the vision for my life then, but I'm telling you now, I look back and I'm like, no, there were things that are in my life right now because of that season.
Wow.
Yeah.
What that was developing in you, with the seeds you were sowing. That's beautiful.
Well, I'd encourage you, take some time, sit with the Lord and just ask him, God, where in the areas of my life where I'm externally motivated versus internally motivated?
Yeah.
And how can I get to that place of love where out of obedience, I'm going to be internally motivated?
Yeah.
How can I just practically begin to get a vision and to be vision motivated rather than pain motivated, vision motivated rather than shame or paycheck or whatever else motivated. And it really does kind of set you apart. What you're talking about, you begin to find even in the world, even in the world, you will be set apart on this issue. So
absolutely. If you have questions on that too, I feel like we could probably do maybe even a follow-up. Like, if there's questions on that, you could feel free to leave them in the comments. Nothing nasty, nothing mean. We don't tolerate it.
Do you know that I just put on I decided I just put a post up and decided to put a thing of like, I am tired and worn out from the disrespect and dishonor on social media. So heads up, I'm going to delete your comment.
Sound like a dad.
No, I totally am in that mode where the kids are getting in the car and I'm like, couple things, kids. We're going to go on an 8-hour drive right now. Let me tell you a few things I am extremely tired of. And so here's what I'm going to do right up. This is what I feel like. I feel like I'm inviting everybody to get in my car for an 8-hour ride. And here's the rules of the car. So, I am that dad of letting you know the rules of this car.
No, he's not messing around.
It's sad that I have to put the rules of the Instagram car.
That's right.
On Instagram.
That's right.
And still somebody like challenged me on it. I forgot what it was. No, like, yeah, somebody on Instagram, another minister commented like, yeah, man, I've just decided I'm going to start blocking. It's getting hard or whatever else. And somebody put, sounds like you just want to be surrounded by yes men. So, as if Instagram is where I'm drawing my, I'm trying to get feedback from people in my life or something. It was astounding. Literally goes, sounds like you just want to be surrounded by yes men.
That's right.
That's exactly what it is. Thank you very much. It is the wild west of insanity. I don't know how we got onto social media right now, but it is the wild, wild west of dishonor and disrespect.
That's the next episode. That's what
we should talk about dishonor and disrespect manifesting on social media.
That's a cliffhanger. See, we're leaving you with part 2. That's what we're going after. But in the comments, if you want to ask questions, if this is stirring stuff up in you or you're wondering or your practical things, we would love to engage with you. So you could leave comments and you could always DM at Jesus Culture on Instagram. And it's always helpful if you subscribe to the channel so you get the ding when a new episode is out. Every other week, we're dropping fresh revelation.
Heavy Revy.
Heavy Revy. No. That's awesome. And we'll see. Maybe we could throw up a picture of Philbert to show you what we were talking about.
It's horrible. Phil, can I just apologize right now as a friend of yours for bringing up the Philbert thing? Even though I'm not super sorry for it, but if I do not want to be in the category of your wife that just hurts your feelings all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you for joining us. Yep. Like, comment,
all the
do
things.
The stars, share, do everything you're supposed to do. And it was great having you.